Hello, friends. Welcome to another lesson with me, teacher Sharby. In this lesson, we are going to talk about how to divide a fraction and a whole number. So, fraction divided by whole number. And you are going to see that you can use different strategies on how to solve a fraction divided by a whole number. Let's look at an example. You have 2/3, and you are going to divide that by 2. So 2/3 is your fraction, and 2 is your whole number. What are we going to do with it? I want to show you that you can do a couple of things. And you know me, in my lessons, I like to show you how to divide using a bar model so that you can have an understanding of this. So, what this is telling us is you are taking 2/3 and you're splitting that 2/3 into two parts. So, your division sign, it tells you that you're splitting something equally. Don't forget, you're splitting it equally into two parts. What are we going to do? You need to first represent your 2/3. And we represent that by drawing a bar model. Look at your denominator. Your denominator is 3. So, what you're going to do is you're going to break up your bar model into three equal parts. There you go. Now you have thirds going on. And then you're going to look at your numerator. Your numerator is telling you that you are going to take two parts because your numerator is 2. So here you have 2/3. Now we are going to look at our whole number, and our whole number is 2. What are we going to do with that? Remember, I said you are going to take your 2/3 and you are going to split it up into two equal parts. So let's do it. You have your 2/3 and you're splitting it into two parts. Here you see part number one, and then you have part number two. Now, what are we going to do with this? You need to find your denominator and you need to find your numerator. So you're going to look and you're going to see that you have how many parts? One, two, three, four, five, six. And we see that we have six parts. The total amount of parts that are there, that is your denominator. Now we're going to find our numerator. And you're going to look and see at your two parts. Here you have, remember I said part number one, and then you have part number two. You're going to ask yourself, how many does each part get? And look at that. Here you have one part that's shaded, and you have another part. You also have the same thing for part number two. Each part they get, or each person, they get two parts. And look, that is your numerator. And as we can see, we can simplify this because our GCF, which is your greatest common factor, is 2. And you might be asking, how do I know that this is 2? Very good question. What you're going to do is you are going to take your numerator and you're also going to take your denominator and you're going to find factors of both of them. The factors of 2 are 1 and 2. And factors are two numbers that you multiply together to get your product. Product is the answer to a multiplication problem. And now we are going to look at 6. We have 1. We also have 2. We have 3. And we have 6. Because 1 times 6 is equal to 6, and 2 times 3 is equal to 6. And you can see that both 2 and 6, they share the number 2. So we are going to take that and we are going to divide both your numerator and your denominator by 2. 2 divided by 2 is equal to what? Yes, 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1. And 6 divided by 2 is equal to what? Very good. That is equal to 3. And there you have it. Your answer is also one third. So you can say it's either 2/6 or it's either one third. And if we were to put this in a real world problem, what you're asking is you have 2/3 piece of something. It could be a piece of pizza, it could be a piece of cake, it could be slime, it could be anything. And you're sharing that 2/3 between two people. So you have two people who wants a piece of either the pizza or piece of cake or whatever you want it to be. And you have to know that that piece is equal to 2/3. So you're asking yourself, how many pieces can I give to each person? Because when you're dividing, what you're doing is you're sharing something equally or you're splitting something into equal parts. So, 2/3, how can I share that between two people? You are going to either do a bar model or you can do another strategy. 2/3 divided by 2 is equal to either 2/6 or one third. And you can see that each person is going to get one third of a piece. And look at this. Let's go back to our bar model. We're going to split it up into three parts. You have your one third because each part is equal to one third, right? And you have two people. You have person number one and you have person number two. Look at that. You can see that each person is going to get one third of a piece. This extra one third, that part don't count because we're not talking about 3/3. We're talking about 2/3 of the piece. So you're only paying attention to 2/3. And then you can see. And then you can ask yourself, is this reasonable? Does my answer make sense? If the answer is yes, then you can say that, yeah, my answer makes sense. And you know that you did it correctly. If it's not reasonable, then you know you need to go back and check. And how do you know if something is reasonable? If you start with a certain amount, like 2/3, and you're splitting that amount between two people, you know you cannot get more than 2/3 as your answer. No, 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 no way. Can't do that. So that's how you know that your answer is reasonable. You have to get a lesser piece. If you're divided, your pieces are going to be less. Don't forget that. Now we're going to look at another strategy. Remember, we are still dividing fractions by whole number. And we are still looking at our fraction that we had before, and we are still looking at our whole number, which is 2. And here's the next strategy. You can turn the whole number into a fraction. So your whole number is 2, right? And you might be wondering, how do I turn this into a fraction? What you can do is set your denominator as 1. And I'm going to prove it to you why this is okay. You're going to take it and you're going to write it as a long division because you're asking yourself, hmm, how do I know that this is true? Let's prove it. Because we always want to make sure that we prove our work. And before I go into that, there are about two ways that you can double check. And you can write it as a long division. And the other way is you can rewrite this by putting a magnifying glass over it and ask yourself, how else can I write 2 over 1? You can see that you can take a whole from this. If you were to take a whole, what would your numerator be and what would your denominator be? Hint, hint. Look at your denominator to help you. Your denominator in this one is telling you how to write your denominator. If my denominator is 1 and I'm trying to find a whole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my numerator as 1 as well. Because any number or any fraction that has a numerator and a denominator that is the same number, same value, same digits is going to equal to 1. We have 1, 1. If you add another 1 over it, what does that equal to? 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, and your denominator stays the same. There you have it. 2 over 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1. Now, if you were to write this as a division problem, this is how it would look. You can say 2 divided by, notice how I write my division sign. I wrote it as the long division sign, 2 divided by 1. And you can ask yourself, how many times can 1 go into 2? Again, how many times can 1 go into 2? We can write our facts. You have 1 times 1 is equal to 1, and 1 times 2 is equal to 2. So how many times can 1 go into 2? It can go 2 times. And now you can multiply 2 times 1 is equal to 2, subtract that, and you're left with 0. So you see, you have the 2 in your answer. It's okay if you have a whole number and you turn it into a fraction by putting your denominator as 1. That is totally fine because as you can see, we just prove it by dividing. You get the same thing. Now let's go on. You have 2/3 divided by 2 over 1. And now you're going to find equivalent fractions because you have two different denominators. You have 2/3 divided by 2 over 1. Notice that your denominators are different. And we know what to do when we do not have the same denominators. Like I said before, if you are adding, you're subtracting, you are dividing, and your denominators are different, we already know what to do. Don't get confused because now we're dividing and our denominators are different. Guess what? We can use the same strategy that we've been using for addition and for subtraction. We can use that same strategy. Don't get confused. And we know that our LCD is equal to 3. So let's see. 2/3 is how many thirds? It's the same thing as 2/3. And 2 over 1 is how many thirds? 2 over 1 is equal to 6/3. Now, let's see. What do you remember about how to solve this problem when your denominators are the same? If you say we ignore our denominators, you are correct. Yeah. So I want to explain to you why we would ignore our denominators. You have 2/3 divided by 6/3. Your denominators are 3, right? What you're actually doing is this. You're doing 2 divided by 6 over 3 divided by 3. That's what you're doing. And I said to ignore the denominators because when you do 3 divided by 3, if you were to write it as a fraction, this is what it looks like 3/3. And we know that 3/3 is the same thing as 1. So you're going to divide this and you're going to have 1 in your denominator. And we know that any number that has 1 in its denominator is equal to the numerator because it's the same thing. Or because when we divide it, we see that our numerator is the same answer that we get. So it's okay to put 1 as your denominator. And if you see in the reverse, you know that your answer is what the numerator is. Now let's go on. Remember, we said we are going to ignore the denominators. So you're going to ignore 3 and 2/3, and you're going to ignore 3 and 6/3. Then you are going to focus on your numerators, which are 2 divided by 6. And you are going to rewrite them as your fraction, not your denominator. You're rewriting your numerators as a fraction. You have 2 in your numerator, and then you have 6 in your denominator because you read it from left to right. Let's look at it. You had, what was the fraction? You had 2/3, then you're dividing 6/3. Remember, we said you ignore the denominator, and now you have your 2 divided by 6. Read it from left to right. You have numerator divided by denominator. That's basically what it is. You can also break down your 2/3 by dividing your numerator by 2 and dividing your denominator by 2. We know that 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1, and 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. That is going to be it for this lesson on fraction divided by a whole number. If you are confused or if you need to watch this over again, rewind it, go back, take your time, take notes, write it over, give yourself more problems, and try to solve it on your own by following the strategies that I use. You can either draw your bar model or you can find your LCD by changing your whole number into a fraction. And you'll see that once you do that, you are always going to get 2 different denominators. You can always go back, watch it, and make sure that you understand what you're doing when you're dividing fraction by a whole number. See you in the next lesson.